Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Expanding Forward radio show. Conversations about juicy living. With your host, Carole Lewitski.
Welcome, everybody, to our Expanding Forward Blog Talk radio show. I am your host, Carole Lewitski. You can join us on our live broadcast every third Monday of the month. We did it a little different this month because of holiday season. But if you're listening to this on a podcast, you can go to blogtalkradio.com/expanding forward and sign up for show reminders to catch the show live for future episodes. We can also be reached at expandingforward.com or through our Facebook page at /expandingforward, or email me directly at carole@lewitski.com. This is a call-in show, so if you'd like to call in, the number is 657-383-0934. And if you're listening online, you'll be able to see a chat box where you're free to ask questions. So I am quite excited about today's show. I should mention here that a lot of what goes on and gets decided in preparation for this show, right from choosing the topic to choosing the guest speaker, primarily happens based on trusting my gut instinct about it. When it became clear who I was going to invite as a guest speaker for this month's show, and of course once he agreed to be on our show, the topic of addiction instantly came up as a conversation that was to be had. About a year ago, I had heard Adam host his own radio show called Brigade Radio, where he was speaking most prominently to listeners within the culinary industry, but really so much of what he covers applies to anyone from any industry or any walk of life. But this one particular episode he did was on addiction, and the things he shared and the vulnerability he expressed to his audience left me reflecting for quite a while after the show was done, I have to say. Here's the thing. Up until that point, I had more commonly categorized those that have addictions versus those that don't, or those that are predisposed to addictive behaviors versus those that aren't. And after listening to what he had to say on the topic, it really kind of stopped me in my tracks and started me thinking and asking myself, where in my own life had I chosen to check out or to shut down through addiction or something or other? And I started understanding that perhaps we all possess some form of addiction, whether it be sourced from outside of us or the less obvious addictions that occur within. So in the last couple of weeks, just as I was getting ready to put this show together, I started asking some friends and colleagues, and even at one point I chatted with my older kids so they could help me do up a list of things that might be considered addictions. And these are some of the items we came up with. I just thought I'd list them off right now, just for reflection before we jump right into the conversation. So some of the things that came up was addiction to drama, addiction to sarcasm, depression, negativity, victimhood, suffering, working, so our jobs, or working out, as in exercise. And what else came up with? Shopping, and then the, of course, obvious ones, computers, TV, social media, sports, food, drugs, alcohol. But some interesting ones that came up was abusive self-talk, perfectionism, judgment of others or self, worrying, addiction to fear, addiction to approval, and gossiping was one of them. Then there was sugar, chocolate, caffeine, money. I mean, the list could really go on, but those are the ones that we were able to come up with, and I thought it would be really interesting and juicy to kind of go from there and discuss further with our guest. But before we get too deep in this, we'll bring on our guest so we can dive right into this much-needed conversation. And just to give you a bit of background on our guest today, his name is Adam Lamb. He is a poet, author, speaker, and certified awakening coach. One of the many hats he wears is that he hosts a cutting-edge show called the Inspired Masculine radio show on Blog Talk Radio, where he is dedicated to expanding the conversation about what it means to be a man in today's society. He is also committed to assisting men of all ages to be their most authentic, connected, passionate, and joyful selves. Adam, welcome to our show.
Thanks, Carole. Appreciate you having me on.
I have to say, I was so happy when you agreed to be here and to have this conversation on a rather sensitive topic. And I thought maybe we could start off by defining addiction for the purpose of this program and how you see that to be.
Well, I kind of have a vested perspective in this because, I've been an adrenaline junkie most of my life, which is probably why I got into the restaurant business in the first place, because it was what I came to appreciate it about the most was it was pretty much instant gratification. You can be toiling away in the kitchen and put a beautiful plate up in the line and right away that it's great. And then it's bolstered more by someone else saying, wow, that's really fantastic. So it was a quick injection of feel good into my psyche. And then when you put on top of it, the pressure cooker of the kitchen, when the machine starts screaming and tickets start flying and everybody just ratchets it up, hours can go by in minutes, and before you know it, it's at the end of the night and you're coming down off this adrenaline rush. Mm-hmm. And of course, there's all the other pitfalls of being in an industry that has alcohol as one of its core concepts, and but that's another case. So I think so. It's been something that's been shadowing me most of my life, and something I've given a lot of thought to, and entered into a bunch of conversations. And I think probably say that I'm not trained as a psychologist or a drug addiction counselor or anything like that. But from my own experience, what I found was addiction came from not what most people would think of as a need to feel good. I was doing what I was doing because I didn't want to feel bad. Right. And so there's a little bit of difference in that. I mean, there's some movies and other radio shows and, in our popular culture, sometimes it can be kind of made to look cool or enjoyable, to kind of put yourself outside your boundaries and to be pushing the limits of not only your endurance, but your body's capability to hold up to stuff. But in reality, it again, speaking only for myself, entered into this cycle by which everything I did fed it or mitigated it or tried to dovetail one into the other. So it became an endless cycle of what I would use in order to kind of not feel bad. I'm not saying feel great or, try to get a euphoric feeling, although there were those times as well. But when it came down to me, it most often was, not wanting to feel bad. And the things that I didn't want to feel bad about, that list was pretty long.
Right. And with having said that about not wanting to feel bad, why would we choose to do something even one of the things that came up was abusive self-talk, how we can just obsessively just have these conversations in our head, cutting ourselves down. Why would we just feel justified in going into that space as opposed to facing what's going on in our own life?
Well, I think you bring up a great point, and it's the definition is probably delicate because addiction by the definition is is a way to deal with things that are wrong. It's a protective mechanism. And something like negative self-talk certainly is a protective mechanism, but I guess the question is, why is it? And to answer that, it would probably help, you and I and some other folks out there are of the mind that, when you come into this life, you come in with a couple different things. You come in with a specific tool set, certain skills that you're able to leverage, and you also come with a personality and an ego. Mm-hmm. And egos are more accurately defined as something that's been with us forever. And in caveman days, ego was keeping us safe. It was, flight or fight response. In almost all cases, ego always wants to hold us, wants to protect us, but it has a very different idea of how it protects us. And I'm using it as a third person very intentionally, that your ego will endeavor to self-talk you down in order to keep your head down in the foxhole, to use a battle analogy. Now, when bullets are flying, it wants to keep you safe, and the way to keep you safe is to keep you small and unnoticeable. Right. So negative self-talk is a really great way of never trying anything, of never sticking your head out of the foxhole or getting out of the foxhole and moving forward in your life. And it'll always keep you in analysis paralysis because you're more fascinated by why things are the way they are instead of actually taking action to make a different outcome possible.
Right, to do something about it, to face the pain or the discomfort that you're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
Yeah. It makes a lot of sense. Go ahead.
No, I think the other thing to ponder is, why would anybody want to try to mask the pain of anything? In my own case, it was the pain of what my parents thought of me. At one point, I decided to believe their characterization or their belief in me, because it seemed so overwhelming. I chose to make them right instead of standing up for who I was and what I was doing. So who really wants to deal with that pain of loss, of rejection, of someone thinking less of you?
Right.
I think it's probably pretty easy to say, yeah, feel better in any possible way that you can. And sometimes people use good things or perceptively good things, and sometimes people use perceptively bad things. And maybe in the final analysis, all they are tools. Now, whether or not they're good tools or bad tools can be debated, or moral or not moral, but certainly exercise and chocolate, pretty canonized in today's society. There's nothing. All you have to do is watch commercials on TV and see how many times chocolate is mentioned or exercise is mentioned as being a good thing. But I've also known some folks, especially gals, who have exercised so much that they stop menstruating.
Right. So it's not so much that it's a thing that's wrong. It's more how it's being used.
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to our attachment to how it's going to make us feel.
Right.
Like eating chocolate because it's going to make you feel good. Exercising because it's going to make you feel good. As soon as we attach a meaning to it, that's when the slippery slope of addiction probably rears its head. And I'm sure people will want to argue with that. But if you're doing something to the exclusion of other things because of how it's going to make you feel, then you probably want to take a look at that.
Right. Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And even you hear a lot, you often hear people say, and I've experienced it myself, it's feeling that hole inside of you that you're just trying to fill with whatever it is you're using. Like a friend of mine was sharing with me the other day how shopping and buying clothes always helped her fill this hole she felt inside of her. When I asked her what she changed, that she doesn't feel that anymore when she goes shopping, she said that she's surrounded by love. She has someone that loves her and her kids. But I remember at one point in my own life that I felt I felt that hole, and yet I was so surrounded by love. Like there was just no reason why I shouldn't be feeling all this love around me. And yet I still felt that hole. And it really speaks to me what you mentioned earlier about just the ego shows up to protect us. And at one point, it's like you're reaching out to people that you love and you expect love in return, and maybe you feel like there's some conditions attached to that love. And so maybe at that point, you just don't allow love in as much anymore. And then you say that could create this hole or this emptiness inside, is that you might have all this love around you, but you actually don't know how to receive it because you built up so many protective mechanisms to not let love in for the fear of it hurting you. And so then you start reaching out to exterior things like chocolate or perfectionism, or just screening for hours on end, watching like 8 solid hours of Netflix to whatever it is that it's going to be to avoid the pain. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that you made a very interesting connection there. And I guess as a junkie, you get to be very well practiced at running away from or ignoring bad things or things that are suboptimal or painful things. Let's say they're just painful. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I'm just curious to ask, do we get so well practiced at running away from the pain that we also get to be very adept at running away from love?
Yeah.
Like if we're gonna shut down the pain, does that mean that we also shut down the love? Because I can remember being in some spaces where there were certainly people that were around that, loved me and wanted nothing but great things for me, and I was like absolutely, I couldn't be present to that because I was so enrolled in my own misery that I wouldn't even allow any of that to come in.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, that makes so much sense, because how else could we explain this void, this emptiness that we're trying to fill with all these other things, and it's insatiable. You'll never be able to satisfy the longing, but it's really, I think it's possible that it's a couple of things. It's longing for love, but also longing for remembering who we are as well, that we shut down so many parts of ourselves and we've suppressed so many aspects of who we are, that until we can, like you said, stand up for yourself, but essentially it's learn to love and accept who we are as a person, only then that we could start actually receiving love from others and slowly not need to turn to these other, but also being okay and open to the fact that there could be pain involved. Like where did this come from, that we, at what point did we decide that pain and discomfort is something we shouldn't feel? I suppose maybe it's just not a natural human thing to want that in our life, but wouldn't you say that sometimes it requires that to attain transformation?
I would say that in almost every case, the pain, the discomfort is there for a reason. And I know that's such a loaded word, because I don't mean to imply that it's some type of lesson or karma or any other kind of crap like that. But in my own case, having significant back pain and medicating and self-medicating myself around it in a very clear way, probably brought on my surgery in a much quicker fashion, as if I was actually present to the pain and discomfort and actually looked at it as something to move energy around, right? Whether that was picking up yoga or Pilates or doing something other than making the pain something that became its own entity in my life. And I say that because of course you have pain. Of course it's in your body, but really is the pain you? And if the pain isn't you, then what is it? Is it something that can be talked to or danced with, I guess? And I'm not saying that I have any answer about this, but to go back to your other point, Carole, I saw something on, there was a quote on Facebook, supposedly, and you never know on these memes whether or not it was Neil deGrasse Tyson, but it said, the great thing about science is that whether you believe it or not doesn't mitigate doesn't change the fact that it is, right? And I was also thinking about love in that same fashion, that I was unable to be present to the love that was actually in my life didn't change the fact that it was there.
Right.
And so how in the heck would I actually, or how would anyone else actually make the shift to actually being present to the love? And really, even if you're present to the love, would it change anything about your addiction? I don't know. What do you think?
I think it can't not make a difference. Like it has to. Like if I think for myself, when I've had times where essentially turn to one of these things, like even for example, suffering or having like difficulties or challenges in life, and it's like you have a story to tell. Like you talk to people, you'd be like, oh, you won't believe what's happening now. And so it can easily become like an addiction to drama because
right.
You're interesting then. It's like you're getting people's attention. And when I started opening myself up to the fact that I'm a writer and I have stories to write and to use this drama and to channel it in my writing or to put it into stories, it's like it took the journey of loving myself to come to recognize this gift that I had to offer. And it's like I didn't feel that necessity anymore to always have a story or to be caught up in needing to have an interesting thing happen in my life that essentially I think sometimes society can also bring this idea too that if you don't have all that drama, if you don't have tough things, then I don't know, don't you find sometimes there's a bit of glory behind or like a badge of honor if you have a tough life? Like if people ask you how you're doing and you're like, oh, I'm like so busy and so stressed and so this and so that, as opposed to saying, you know what, like life is great. There's almost like a guilt around feeling happy.
Yeah, you don't get any points or badges for leading a great life and not really having a whole lot to complain about. At least in today's society, I've done other courses and they all had some type of way of describing mass consciousness, right? Whether you call it the drift or the density or whatever, there's that mass consciousness that is connected to all of us, actually. But also, I think is also joined at the hip electronically with a lot of media and certainly advertising campaigns and a lot of stuff that's going on. I mean, certainly you don't have to look very far to see lots and lots and lots of commercials around depression or there was one the other day I saw about, now they've called out a condition where people either spontaneously laugh or spontaneously cry due to some traumatic brain injury. And while I'm sure that actually exists, I'm not quite sure to the general public they actually need to advertise that because there's folks that are going to be running for that. But it's almost, to get back to this being committed to your drama, it's like you want to make the story right. You really want to live that. You want to populate it with, your ability to be strong through heartache and misery. And like you absolutely said, it's like, you get a badge of honor for that. And maybe your chair is a little bit closer to God once you die. And that's basically your payback for having
it is absolutely
quote unquote suffered your life or survived your life. And I think this
Right.
show and others, I think the conversation is about thriving, is about having a joyous life, because ultimately,
Absolutely.
ultimately you can shift a lot more with kindness and compassion and grace and joy than you ever could with emotions that are kind of lower on the emotional scale, I guess you would say.
Right. Well, and it's not about saying that your life would be without suffering as a result of going down that road. It's about not having judgment around it as well, right? When things get tough, it's like, okay, things are tough. What am I to see in this? Like even when you talked about your back pain, is that not just a way for our body to be communicating to us, to be giving us cues and clues that we need to make some changes? And when we ignore that, go ahead.
No, I completely agree. I feel very, very strongly that our bodies are our biggest gift, if you want to call it God or the universe or whatever you want to call that higher power, or even if you don't have a higher power, it's pretty clear that your body is your best friend and is engineered beyond any of our wildest dreams, able to come back from all kinds of different stuff and regenerate itself. I mean, the stomach lining is regenerated within 5 days. Your bones actually are completely grown anew within a year, et cetera, et cetera. But it provides a perfect feedback loop to us. And so if a lot of us, including myself, just didn't understand what the language was in which it was speaking to me. So I actually had to slow down enough to actually listen to what it was trying to tell me in my joints and in my muscles and the way things were interconnected. And, I just got done with a 6-day juice fast. And if anybody knows me as a chef and as a hedonist of all types of wonderful things that the world has to offer, food is up there. So, but I just got the feeling, on my stomach and other parts of my body, there was probably time to just kick back and blend up some smoothies and just give my body a rest and give it time to kind of reset itself. I'm not saying I'm going to go right out and grab a pizza, but having a willingness to listen is probably where it begins, and that's exactly where it began for me. And if you're willing to listen to it, if you're willing to look at, willing to look at your story from a position of neutrality, like I keep coming back to that time and time again in my current days. And, granted, there are days when I can do that, and there are days when I certainly can't. But in most cases, if I can step back from throwing a judgment on something, someone, some conversation, if I can actually just come back from a place of neutrality and take a deep breath and then just look at it as, is there something to do about this? And move energy around it, because once you move energy around one thing, you're moving energy around everything. And I guess maybe some folks might have some difficulty with the idea of moving energy because it's not something that you can readily see. But basically what I mean is by taking action on one thing, you actually take action on everything. Even if you're not coming to a specific conclusion, but you're kind of looking at the opportunities and the different possibilities and continuing to be committed to the conversation and the dance about what that might look like, can open up lots of possibilities.
And wouldn't you say that when we're stuck in the addictive behavior, whether it be like worrying incessantly, all the what ifs, what if I need surgery, like just continue with the back thing, what if I end up being in a wheelchair, what if, and just obsessing with worrying, it checks us out completely and doesn't even allow us to hear what our body is trying to tell us and what action to take and how to move energy, like you said, by taking action.
Yeah, and I mean, even over the course of the weekend, Carole, there were a couple things that came up for me that kind of had me kind of getting into the blues a little bit. And even though in other conversations it was kind of like, okay, well, some folks are trying to talk to me and have me looking at other things and maybe shift my perspective and put on a smiley face and all that kind of. And nobody wants to hear that crap when they're depressed or when they're in pain. However, what someone told me that really hit the nail for me was, okay, then have the best, worst day ever. And it was almost like giving myself permission to dive all the way down deep into it and to really look at it. And again, see if there was something to do. And even though I didn't feel like it, didn't want to do it, there were a couple things that I, played around with just to kind of move energy on, even though I knew that there wasn't going to be any conclusion out of it. But, I'd like to call it awakening schizophrenia. Like anybody who thinks that folks who are going about their work to be more self-aware, to be more mindful, to be more kind and considerate and loving, caring, communicative. There's this idea that once you're on the awakening path or you're enlightened, that you should know this stuff, like it shouldn't affect you anymore. But the fact of the matter is that's just a bunch of BS. We're going to get affected by that stuff all the time. I mean, does it happen to you every once in a while?
Oh, never, ever. It happens so much, and what I'm noticing is that each time I get to practice not judging it. Like that's the part, exactly what you just said, where it's like I could so easily just fall back into the self-criticism, right? The abusive self-talk, just being like, you should know better. This is crazy. You have the tools. You coach people on this, for crying out loud. Can't you get your act together? Can't you just figure things out? And why, right? And then it just throws us into this space. But at the same time, just being so okay that we'll go through periods like that. And the difference is that we can start recognizing it and bringing awareness to it. Whereas I can look back and say that I wouldn't have even had any awareness that I was in that space years ago, that I would have obsessively worried, or I would have obsessively seeked out people's approval all the time. It's like I need to know that I'm okay, that I'm on the right track, and until I have someone confirming that or validating that for me, I can't know that for myself, or judging myself constantly, or jumping into the pantry and eating a load of chocolate or whatever, right? To not face what's there right in front of me, but then to be okay that we go in and out of that and recognize that that is part of the process, and that there really is only, the question to ask is, why am I checking out of my life, and what am I not looking at that I could be looking at? And then to be okay with the discomfort of what's coming up for us to look at, and the changes that are needed. And I mean, either way, it's not comfortable. It's not like the addictive behavior is putting us in a space of bliss and euphoria. I mean, maybe sometimes, but then you pay for it after. Right? Exactly. You pay for it later. And I mean, it sounds funny with chocolate, but it's true. Like I see myself like just my body shuts down and I become numb. And what do I miss out on? Like just everything that's right in front of me, all of it. You're not just shutting out the uncomfortable and the difficult aspects of your life. You're also shutting out the amazing, beautiful parts of your life. I shouldn't say I am shutting that out when I give in to those addictions. And I should probably do, station identification. I'm so new at this, but I just noticed the time, and just wanted to remind everyone that you're listening to the Expanding Forward Blog Talk radio show, and we're having a juicy conversation. It's almost hard to snap out of it because it's like, wow, this is intense but so needed. So what are your thoughts on that? Like when you check out of the game, when you're not in your life fully, what are we missing out on? What are we closing the door on that we can't ever get back?
I want to jump in there, but I also want to preface it by saying that if there's any listeners out there who are in the depths of a chemical dependency, all right?
Yeah.
please do yourself a favor. Check yourself in. Go to a professional. Make sure that you deal with the chemical addiction first, which can be almost way too powerful. And the reason I know is because I was addicted to prescription painkillers for I was taking them for 3 years, or taking them for 5 years and addicted for 3. I guess it doesn't even matter, just like the way it made me feel or not feel. But certainly if you're out there and you're listening to the show, your life matters.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And the world is incomplete without you. So if that hits you anywhere, please take the time, seek out a counselor, check out a program, get yourself where you need to be. And I mean us individually and us collectively, our evolution as human beings and cosmic playmates depends on, or is directly related to the crowd or community that you're plugged into. So if who you're with ain't working for you, got to change the people, got to change the places. Someone very, very, very dear to me was an alcoholic and went through a program, then went through a halfway house, and she is leading a really incredible life. And I thank the stars every day that she's still around. So what are we missing out on? I think, I can speak for me. What I was missing out on was my huge capacity for creation. And started out when I was really small with art and sang in a band and wrote lyrics. And when my addiction turned darker, that was something that was completely cut off from me. And I know that when I am in that creative vortex, when I'm in that space, the zone, whatever word you want to use, when I am in that space, magic starts happening in my life. Not because I'm making it happen, but because I am a participant in the co-creation of what my life could be like. And so when all those rabbit holes start opening up in front of me, a friend of mine said, your problem, Adam, is that you can do so much. So you're always kind of split off. But as we found out, there's actually a word for that. It's called multi-potentialite, and it's something to be embraced. It's true, multi-potentialite. Yeah,
nice.
That's something to be embraced instead of think that there's something wrong with you. So when those
sorry, go ahead.
And when that juicy stuff starts happening in my life, my entire life opens up. And so what I missed out on was opportunities like this, being on your radio show, and the friends and loved ones who I have in my family, the deepening of the relationship with my children, even to come to a deeper understanding of what love is and who I am, because I went through a process or an exercise by which, I was able to strip away a lot of identities and roles that I'd been carrying with me my entire life. And in the end, the question about, well, if I'm not that, then who the heck am I? And what I realized pretty quickly is I'm, a goofy, lighthearted guy who likes to be in partnership with other people, in a relationship with other people, who likes to create stuff. And having that, and maybe that's the way I came into this life, but for a long time I forgot. And to be honest, things are so juicy now, man. I plan on hanging around for, at least another 75 years.
Oh, God. That's cute. That's awesome. I love what you mentioned about just having so much potential. And I would say that in itself can create a certain level of fear, because when we've become so used to just hanging on to being stuck, as uncomfortable as that can be, to stay in this self-sabotaging type of space, it's familiar, right? That's one thing about it. It's familiar. So anything outside of that, anything like you were talking about at the beginning of the show, how if we stay stuck in that space, then we can stay little, we can stay small, we don't need to be seen, we don't need to go out there. And so
can
the other
stay safe.
suggestion on, because there's that fear of like, okay, if I really show up now, if I don't keep running to these things that can check me out and keep me small and keep me hidden, then what does it look like? And I would even go so far as to say that as destructive or suboptimal these things can be, it almost can become like a security blanket. I think of my kids. My mom would always knit them a security or a knit blanket for when they were babies, and
a binky.
Blanky, and they just loved it so much to the point where it was like a strangling hazard. Like they'd be sleeping with it years later, and it's like so full of holes, but it's so familiar. So it's like it's dangerous, but it's familiar. And you just grow this attachment to these addictions that keep you small, that the idea of letting yourself just release that and let go of that just creates a certain degree of fear of the unknown. And do you have some thoughts on how to just step into that? Because I know you've been, sure, in and out, but you're definitely stepping into it more and more, of just emanating who you are and who you came here to be. And are there words that you could share that could give us all like the courage to step more and more into that space?
Wow, Carole, that's like some big responsibility.
Well, something that comes to mind is to go ahead. Are you going to take the challenge, or?
I am going to take the challenge. And it's not, these aren't even my words. Marcus Aurelius, who was a Stoic philosopher and coincidentally the Emperor of Rome, asked or said once, and forgive me if I'm paraphrasing or even misidentifying it, but the saying to me sounds something like, of anything, ask what its nature is. So to be able to look at my fear and go, okay, what is this? Like you talked about perfection earlier on as being an addiction. And I know that there's a lot of people who are absolutely positively committed to their perfection, whether they want to call it an addiction or a protective mechanism. It all comes down to the same thing. So I look at it and go, okay, so what is that really? Well, they're trying to be perfect because they don't want to be seen as, first off, if they're being perfect, that there's control there. There's also probably a safety issue where they don't perceive that the world is safe, so that they are trying to keep everything as perfect or as controlled as possible. So then that really is a fear of the world not being safe, period. Whether their perfectionism was around their relationships or around work or whatever. The world is not safe, so if I can control it and keep it perfect, then it's going to hurt less. And our ego is, is the mind chatter, this kind of circular conversation that happens in one's mind. I know for me, it's almost like judge, jury, and executioner. And a friend of mine once said, someone who I love and respect said, so just make it right. Like instead of trying to battle the conversation, like, Adam, you're no good. Okay, I'm no good. And then what? Like as soon as giving that to my ego kind of shut it up and said, okay, by the way, my ego's name is Sluggo. For those of you who remember that, the Nancy comic strip, just because it kind of looks a little bit like me. And also naming it can actually, as a separate entity, can also create some space in which to breathe, especially when you realize that the conversation that's going on in your head isn't really the truth. It's just ego's interpretation of what the situation calls for. So to be mindful and present while that's happening is a huge gift, because again, you can come back to this place of neutrality and go, okay, thanks for sharing. Don't really care what you have to say, but now what? What is there to do? What action is there to take to move forward and not stay stuck? I got an email this morning from my ex-wife who's concerned about my daughter because she's got her own little place. I think this is the first time that she's actually ever been on her own in her own place, and she was texting back and forth. And my daughter said, I think I'm getting more depressed being by myself. And so my ex said, "So what are you going to do about it?" And my reply back was, "I'm going to encourage her to get out and connect with people. It's not necessarily part of her clique. Be in service to some other community that's more in need." She used to do Meals on Wheels during Thanksgiving, but here during the holiday season, I'm sure that there's lots of folks that she could give time to. She's got her own little business of yacht maintenance and cleaning. She could be out promoting those things. So, like, to be out in the world, to take a walk, to observe the natural world in all its glory. Granted, cars are not necessarily natural, but they are certainly part of our world. But to be out in nature, to be with her dog, to walk to the beach, those type of things can be very, very powerful to kind of help jog us and actually reactivate the memory of who we really are. Because I think ultimately it's just we forget, man. Either intentionally or unintentionally, most of us forget.
So true, and doing all those things you mentioned is really opening yourself up to be loved by the universe.
Right. Exactly. Opening up yourself. Yeah. So, opening up yourself. That could be kind of dangerous. Can it, Carole?
Well, I would say I had a conversation with someone close to me who was sharing with me how he got hurt by someone, and as a result, it's like closing himself off to love because it just hurts too much. And it's like, how do you take that step to put yourself out there again and just see that there's so much more of a payoff to allowing love in, even if it means there could be pain involved. I think we're just so trained to think that well, I guess because it doesn't feel good. Pain doesn't feel good. But if we could see pain as just part of the experience as well, that it's not something to... Go ahead.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, hold on, I'm sorry about that. I think that's an incredibly enlightened perspective and not one that's easy to attain. But because I think as human beings, there's probably something very primal about wanting to run from pain and towards pleasure or anything that could be perceptively pleasing. But I think that probably minimizes the positive impact that pain or discomfort could have in our lives in the present and moving forward. Breaking the chain of certain behaviors, and allowing another possibility to come in. And for me, there was a lot of release around the fact or the idea that, we're all victims and perpetrators. And that kind of allowed me to have some grace around some of the ways I've behaved in the past and to come to a place where I could have much more compassion for a lot of other people in my life. And that's, even though living a larger life can be perceptively more dangerous to my ego, what I'm finding is that my life is so much more broadened and enriched by those relationships that I don't think I could ever go back down that rabbit hole for too long, without popping my head back up and say, okay, done. I had my best worst day ever. Now I'm back at it.
Right. Yeah, and that's the key, is that rather than staying stuck in it, as you bring more awareness to it, you don't need to stay in that space for as long because you see it for what it is. And then you get to choose the pain of the addiction, ultimately, is what it creates. It's just being masked by pleasure, but it doesn't remove the pain that we eventually will want to face.
Yeah,
to be able to move forward and to deepen relationships.
Yeah, there's a gift there somewhere. Whether It's encouraging to open up your life to the love that's already present, and the relationships are already there that get to be deepened and nurtured. There's a gift around making a different choice, whether that's perceptively really scary, like going out on your own, by yourself, in your own little place, where you don't have a community built up around that's not shared by someone else or cohabitated or co-opted by other people. I mean, there's lots and lots and lots of things that are actions that I can take, or that you can take, or that anyone can take, that our egos would make up as being scary. But, of anything, what is its nature? Is it really scary, or is it not? Is it the story that I'm telling myself, or is that the reality of the situation? So to be able to come to be mindful enough to ask those questions goes a long way into having the courage to break those behaviors. But I'm not going to sit here and say that it's easy to do that, or that it's...
No, that's for sure.
Or that it's even... there's folks out there who have had their fair share of pain, and
Absolutely.
they are done with that. And to them, I say, blessings upon you, and go about your life. But if there's anybody out there who's looking for something else that might be possible, you have an inkling, you have kind of a squirrel away in your stomach going, might not necessarily not be right, but there's certainly more here that's possible, then welcome home. Come on, the water's fine.
It absolutely is. And I think on that note, the most important note is to not step into that water alone. Like we are, you're a coach, I'm a coach, and we still seek assistance in our...
We have coaches.
Yeah, absolutely. And it to me, that's not something that anyone that's willing to test the water and to try to see, like, is there something more? Is there something better that I can't continue doing what I'm doing? I don't feel that should ever be done alone.
I think it's almost impossible to do by yourself, only because that self-talk can continue to be reinforcing. And the more and more I step into this work and in my life, I realize that it takes a community. It takes a village to populate my life. And there's lots of times when I might be feeling something that it takes someone to kind of trigger that, whether it's making my ego right or by giving me the permission to have the best, worst day ever. But it takes a community for us as a species and as a race to actually realize the potential that is in each one of us individually and collectively, for sure.
Yeah, I think that not enough can be said about that.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And it ain't about drinking Kool-Aid.
Wow, you had to go there.
Yeah,
that's
of course.
Awesome. Okay, so I think that's a good place to wrap up. Let's just never do this alone. Let's just you on your end. What? How can people reach you? What are you up to these days? And
well, as you said,
I know you're always on the go.
Yeah, but first off, I wanted to say thank you, Carole, for having me on. It's been a real pleasure talking to you, and I really get jazzed about our conversations because they seem to get deeper every single time. Not that there's ever an evident end anywhere, but it's always great to move energy with you. And so I am currently working on the Inspired Masculine as a program underneath the umbrella of The Wide Awakening, which is at thewideawakening.com. InspiredMasculine.com is currently under construction, but what we've done is we've started the radio show, which is here on Blog Talk Radio, and you can listen to that the third Wednesday of every month at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I actually have a show coming up this Wednesday on December 16th with a great guy. His name is Josh Rivdale.
What time is that at?
Rivdale, 6:30 p.m. around the episode is called Holiday Ho-Hum. So it's
cool.
It's about seasonal depression and just there's a lot of the blues when it comes to this week. So you can check us out at blogtalkradio.com/Inspired Masculine, and on Facebook it's the Inspired Masculine Alliance. And if you're looking to connect with me personally, you can do that at adammlam.com.
Fantastic. Cool. Well, I personally want to thank you so much for having this conversation today. But beyond that, I want to thank you just for stepping into your role as a leader for men in particular. I mean, I know you affect both men and women, but just having 6 boys of my own and knowing that they're growing up to become men themselves and that there are great leaders and mentors out there like yourself for them to turn to, that makes my heart of a mother very, very happy. So thank you for saying yes.
You're making me blush now.
You're right. So thank you so much for saying yes to your calling, to your piece of the puzzle. You rock. So
thank you.
So you can reach us at expandingforward.com or through our Facebook page /expandingforward, or email me directly at carole@lewitski.com. And we do this radio show every 3rd Monday of the month, or we will be starting in January. And so you go to blogtalkradio.com /expandingforward. Hope you enjoyed the show today. I know I did. And thanks again, Adam, for joining us. And have a good rest of your day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Expanding Forward radio show with your host, Carole Lewitski. To find out more about Carole, you can visit www.expandingforward.com or check her out on Facebook at facebook.com /expandingforward.